Well, good evening, everyone, or good night to some of you. We have people really from all over the world, including from Australia. So good morning to you. This is going to be a very interesting class because my goal is to teach you something that you didn't know before. And really, well, I want to congratulate you on finding the time to actually come here and learn how to deal with this challenging GMAT Quant section. So today, we're going to do a few things that will help you better understand this section, and most importantly, will help you deal with that section. And some of the things we're going to do today are going to bring back the old memories from the high school, middle school, or maybe even elementary school. And some of the things, the way we're going to approach the questions, the way we're going to tackle these GMAT problems are going to be different from maybe what you've ever seen before. And that is why, as we're going through some exercises today, as I'm teaching you some of the strategies, yes, hello, you might feel at some point just a little bit of a warning disclaimer. You might feel a little outside of your comfort zone. And I'm not going to ask you to do anything crazy like stand upside down or do all these sorts of crazy things. But I'm going to give you problems. It might take you outside of a comfort zone, GMAT problems, especially if you haven't done math for a very long time. So all I'm going to ask you to do is just play along. And please remember that whenever you don't know how to do a question, this is your opportunity to learn something important. Well, sometimes if you look at the question, like, I have no idea where to start, so I'm kind of panicking, don't worry. Just do your best. We are going to break things down. By the end of the class today, you will feel like you can tackle any question, certainly any question that it will have covered today. Please grab a pen and paper. You're going to want to take some notes, and you're going to want to take some notes as you're doing these questions. Now, we're going to do a series of questions today. And of course, I'm going to teach you how to do these questions. I'm also going to teach you how to study for the GMAT. That's my goal, is that you walk away with something really valuable you can't really find on the website very easily. And that's why you would want to take some notes. And the one thing I'm going to ask you, though, is any question we're going to do today or tonight, please do not Google it. It kind of defeats the purpose. And please do not use a calculator. So here's the first question. Let me get this poll out of your way, just so that it doesn't block your view. Okay, so there we go. And here's the question. So it's a very simple question. There is a question, the 5 answer choices, there are no tricks. One of these answer choices is correct, 4 are incorrect. And just to make things a little more interactive, what we're going to do is I'm just going to launch a quick poll. You can move it around your window so it doesn't block your view. But when you're ready, just please choose an answer. And then I will see that you are done, and we'll talk about this question. So I'll be quiet for about a minute or so until I see that most of you answered the question. All right, so it's been about a minute, and I just wanted to show you really quickly what everybody voted for. So as you could see, a really nice, kind of like a triangle. Most people voted for C, a few people for D, and some people for E. Let's discover what is the right answer. Drum roll, please. It is C. So the answer is C. Now, let me ask you a question. In order to deal with this question, And by the way, if you are in a panic zone, don't worry, we're going to break everything down in small steps. Just please stay with us. So what is it that we needed to know in order to tackle this question? Well, first of all, we needed to understand what's an exponent. The question is dealing with exponents. And here specifically, we had 3 exponents, 1 to the power of 1, 2 to the power of 2, which of course, everybody knows that that's a 4, and then 3 to the power of 3. So that's, we just had to recognize that it is simply 3 times 3 times 3. And that, by the way, is 27. Now we needed to add then 27, 4, and 1. And just for the record, that is 32. Now, if you remember the previous slide, there was no 32 among the answer choices. So what else did we have to do is perhaps then convert 32 back into the power of 2, because the answer choices were in the powers of 2. And if we know that 32 is to the power of 5, that's great. By the way, it's a really good habit to know your powers of 2 all the way until 2 to the power of 10. Really helpful in the GMAT. You might want to write this down. But if you don't know, or you didn't know that yet, then all you need to do is just keep multiplying 2 onto itself until you get to 32. Then count how many 2's do you have. In this case, we have 5. So the answer is 2 to the power of 5. Now, if you got that correctly, congratulations. If you didn't get this correctly, that's amazing, because you're just about to learn something really important. So what else did we need to know? Well, what was an exponent? That was number 1. And of course, we needed to know how to add and multiply, right? These are very small numbers, so it's easy to multiply and easy to add. Now, you might be wondering, well, okay, well, I remember that sometime in university, I was learning some very sophisticated, somebody was asking, the question was 1 to the power of 1, 2 to the power of 2, and 2 to the power of 3. That's actually not correct. It was 3 to the power of 3, just for the record. So that is why it's 32. So you might be wondering, okay, well, I remember maybe in my university, I was learning calculus, I was learning these integrals. Is that what I need to know for the GMAT? And I can tell you from my own experience, I have a master's of mathematics. I was doing math for 6 years in university, and I've done a lot of really sophisticated things when it comes to math. And guess what? None of it showed up on the GMAT, because everything on the GMAT was from secondary school. And the GMAT really cannot reward people who in school did really well in math, because this is not a test to get into a math program. And it can't really reward people who come from certain specific cultures that are really good in math. So even though you might have heard or maybe read on some forums that, you know, if you did really well in math in school, then you're going to do much better on the GMAT, that's not necessarily the case. Because even for me, I had a master of math. I needed to remember, what is a quadratic equation? What does it mean, a prime number? I haven't done these sorts of things in university. I've done multidimensional fractal geometry, but I haven't done quadratic equations, if you know what I mean. So the GMAT, very straightforward, very upfront. In pretty much any GMAT book or website, they will tell you, well, we're just testing some basics, arithmetic, elementary algebra, and some commonly known geometry concepts. So you might be wondering, well, okay, I've heard that the GMAT is a difficult exam. So what gives? Why is it difficult if the math is easy? Well, let's take a look at another question, and perhaps that's going to help you a little bit better understand what's coming your way on the GMAT. So let's take a look. Here's another question. It actually is going to look very similar to the question we've just done. It's going to be laid out exactly the same way, just the numbers are going to be different. And I'm going to give you about a minute. And again, I'm just going to ask you, please do not use a calculator. So here's the question. You have about a minute. All right. So it's been a minute and a half, and I'm going to close the poll right now. I see that many people still haven't voted, which tells us that this is a more challenging question. Let me share the results with you. So as you could see, the most popular answer was E, and then we also had C, fewer people for D and B, and the fewest for A. So there's a lot more disagreement, obviously, a lot more challenging question. So let me ask you a question. What was more challenging about this question? Just please throw it in the chat box. The question looked almost exactly the same. In fact, the answer choice looked simpler. There weren't exponents in the question. So what was more challenging? Just give me some feedback in the chat box, just so I know what is going through your mind. Yeah, everybody's saying I have bigger numbers. So theoretically, and let's just call this way to approach, exactly, I can't multiply everything fast enough. I wasn't given a calculator. So see, the question looked very similar to the previous question, and we've learned the theory. We learned what's an exponent. We just keep multiplying things, and we learned how to add. But if I were to try to multiply, yeah, I can maybe do this with 14 to the power of 4. But once I get to 15 to the 5 and 16 to the 6, these are very large numbers. So I can't really do this so quickly. I can't really multiply 16 times 16 times 16. It's going to take me a very long time to add, to do all of that, right? And probably it's going to take me like, I don't know, 8 minutes. And do I have 8 minutes on the GMAT? No, I don't. If I had 8 minutes, I can definitely do that. If I had a calculator, I can definitely do that. But I don't have a calculator and I don't have 8 minutes. So I need to do something different. And this is where the GMAT is really making it more difficult for us. So that's why the GMAT isn't really a high school exam. And we'll get to this and we'll get what the GMAT is really trying to test here. But it's not just about testing math, because we need to think outside the box, maybe get outside of that comfort zone. So here's what we can do. We could say, okay, I could maybe avoid doing calculations by taking some shortcuts. And one of the shortcuts that we could take is what's called the unit digit strategy. So the way the strategy works is, if I were to multiply any two numbers, so for example, I got two numbers here on the screen. If I were to start multiplying them, I'm going to begin with the last digit. And that last digit is called the units digit because it counts the number of units or the number of ones. So the first number has a units digit of 6, and the second number has a units digit of 7. Now, when I begin my long multiplication, I would start by multiplying 6 by 7. And by the way, that's 42. So what would happen next? Now, if you remember how to do long multiplication, I would then take the 4 and I would carry it over to the next digit, which by the way is called the tens digit. But the 2 is going to stay where it is. It's going to remain in that units digit place. So what this strategy means is, if I were to multiply two numbers, and it actually works with any number of numbers, and it works for addition as well. If I were to add or multiply numbers, what I can do is I can just take the units digits 6 and 7, I can multiply those units digits, and whatever the result I'm going to get, I take the units digit of that result, which in this case is 2, and that has to be the units digit of the whole multiplication. So see how instead of spending 10 minutes trying to multiply these two numbers and going through all of the steps, within literally 10 seconds, we know what the last digit is going to be. And because the GMAT is a multiple choice exam, very often that is all we need to do. In fact, look at the answer choices. You would notice that all of them have different units digits, except for B and E. And when we actually go through the process, when we find the units digit of the result, hopefully it's not going to be 5. Hopefully it's going to be something else, and then we are done. But if it is a 5, then we can probably quickly estimate whether the number is going to be about 4 million or about 200 million. I think it's going to be pretty easy to assess that, right? But hopefully we won't have to do this. Now, this is an awesome strategy because it cuts down on our work so dramatically. And I have to tell you, for full disclosure, after 12 years of teaching the GMAT, there was not once that I had to do on multiplication. So just to give you an idea of what the GMAT's all about, right? Not once. And I've personally done tens of thousands of questions. There's always a shortcut. There's always a better, a quicker way. So let's see how we can use the units digit strategy here on this question. Now, 14 to the power of 4. That is just 14 times 14 times 14 times 14. And again, if we just focus on finding that last digit, we can even go step by step. So we can do 14 to the power of 1, which means 14 multiplied by itself once. That's, of course, 14. 14 squared, that's 14 times 14. And again, if we just sticking with that strategy, 4 times 4 is 16. So the answer has to end in a 6. Well, let's keep going. We need to get to 14 to the 4. So we're going to take this number now and add one more 14. In fact, we multiply by one more 14. So that number multiplied by 14, that's just like taking a number that ends in a 6, multiplying a number that ends in a 4. The same strategy, 6 times 4 is 24. Take the 4, don't need the 2. Just focus on the last digit. See, the math is so easy. We just deal with digits from 0 to 9. And then let's take one more step, 14 to the power of 4. So that's going to be 4 times 4, and that's, of course, 16. So what we found is that 14 to the power of 4 ends in a 6. Now, here is the beauty of this strategy. I think you would have noticed by now that there's a pattern. And the pattern is that the only numbers we can get there are 4 and 6. And in fact, if we're careful noticing the pattern, that's a very important skill, is to really recognize that there are patterns on the GMAT. Now, of course, there's a variety of different patterns you can learn. And if you come to our class, then we're actually going to teach you all these patterns. But it's also really important that you develop the skill of noticing the patterns throughout your preparation for the GMAT and throughout doing the questions on the GMAT. So you will probably notice the pattern here is that whenever the power of 14 is odd, and odd numbers are 1, 3, 5, and so on, then the units digit is going to be 4. And whenever the power is even, the units digit is going to be 6. So that's a pattern of 4. Other digits have different patterns, of course, but that's a pattern of 4. And if we know that there's this pattern, and we asked instead of 14 to the 4, we asked for 14 to the power of 700, we don't need to go to 700. We are just done. Okay, so let's keep going. 15 to the power of anything is 5, right? Because 5 times 5 is 25, 5 times 5 is 25, so we could just keep going. It's always a 5. 16 to the power of also anything is 6. 6 times 6 is 36, times 6 is 36. So these are the digits, and there are a number of these digits. Remember, we have 10 digits in total from 0 to 9. So all of these digits have some patterns. So for 15 and 16, the patterns are really easy. It's just always the same number at the end. You can try. It's always going to be 5 or it's always going to be 6. So now the strategy, remember, works for multiplication and addition. So if we now take 3 numbers, the first number ends in a 6, the second number ends in a 5, the third number ends in a 6, we add them up and we get to 17. Well, how many answer choices end in a 7? Only one. So Paul is asking, well, what if I have more than one answer choice that ends in a 7? So there would be, and we got lucky here, and very often we would, because remember, the GMAT isn't out there to test how well we can calculate. The GMAT is out there to test how well we can use these strategies, how well we can think outside the box. But if it did happen, all this means is that we needed to probably do something else, maybe in addition to what we just done. Still doesn't mean we need to do the calculations, but if we look at B and E, then all we need to do is just simply understand whether the answer is going to be about 4 million or about 200 million. So can somebody tell me, in order for me to understand that, roughly, which of these 3 numbers would I have to estimate? Because I have 3 numbers that I'm going to add. Which of these 3 do I need to approximate to understand if it's about 4 million or it's about 200 million or it's about something else. What do you think? It's going to be the 14, the 15, or the 16? They will have to estimate. If we had to actually understand approximately what it is. Yeah, Edwin is saying it's 16. And of course, because see, 14, 15, and 16 are numbers that are pretty close to each other. But 14 to the 4, 15 to the 5, and 16 to the 6 are actually very different. If you remember what we did in the theory way, when we actually had to calculate, 14 to the 4 was about 30,000. And 16 to the 6 was 16 million. Huge difference. Which also brings us to another way of doing this question. Now, this is a good way of doing this question. And this is what most people are going to do. They're just going to use the units digit strategy. And after about a minute, maybe 2 minutes, they're going to get the answer. Now, of course, if you know the patterns, if you know how to deal with these questions quickly, if you know what strategy to use, it is going to take you even less time. But what if you don't have that time? You know, what if you're going through the test and say this is the last question and you only have maybe 30 seconds left? Well, what else can you do? Let's talk about really the very advanced way of doing this question. Let's call it the mastery way. You know, if you like skiing, that's kind of like going to be going on double diamond. So how can we do this? Oh, remember, I've just asked you, and you were all correct that, well, 16, Elizabeth, Edwin, they are saying 16 is the number I'm going to estimate. And what gives us the permission to use this strategy to just approximate the number? See, we don't have to calculate the number exactly. That's how the GMAT is different from other tests, such as, for example, GRE. Whereas on the GRE, many questions are not going to be multiple choice. You're actually going to have to calculate the answer and type it in a box provided. So if you're off by 1 digit, you're done. But here on the GMAT, it's a multiple choice. So if I were to estimate a number and recognize it's about 5 million, well, I know it's B. And if it's about 200 million, I know it's C, right? And I can do this really quickly because the answer choices are very far apart. I'm curious if you actually looked at the answer choices while you were doing this question. But this is a very good skill to have, is to see what the answer choices give you. So if I were to estimate by doing a very rough calculation, maybe just taking what 16 to the power of 6, by the way, if you know your powers of 2, I know it might be hard to believe right now, but 16 to the power of 6 is a number you can estimate in 15 seconds. A very, very easy number to estimate because 16 to the power of 6 is 2 to the power of 24, and it's a very easy number to estimate. So let's say I'm going to estimate, and I'm going to get some sort of a number. And knowing the GMAT, and this is what I'm saying, this is more like a double diamond. You really have to be very comfortable doing this. But if you want to get a score of 700 or more, and that's going to be very frustrating. That's why it's important that you overcome that and learn these sorts of things. If I look at the answer choices, I would notice that 2 answer choices are close to each other. That is not there at random. There's a reason for that. And the reason is the GMAT is trying to trick me into doing the long calculations. It's trying to say, okay, somebody's going to choose to estimate. See, the GMAT spends a lot of time and money writing every single question. They do lots of research. They observe what people do. They employ some psychologists, so they know exactly how people think. So what are many people going to do? They're going to say, okay, I'm going to estimate. You know, I've learned some advanced strategies. I'm not just going to calculate, I'm going to estimate. And when they estimate, what's going to happen? They'll end up being close to C or D. And the GMAT knows that. So then many people are going to say, okay, let me go and do the calculation. I've seen many people do this, so please don't think it's crazy. A lot of people do this, and maybe many of you are going to do this as well. So instead, I'm going to do something different. If I can understand well enough the GMAT, if I am, let's say, 90% sure that the answer is C or D, just because I know how the GMAT thinks. See, if the GMAT knows how we think, we can also learn how the GMAT thinks or how the GMAT is trying to trick us. Or we know how some of the silly mistakes that people are making. That's why in our class, we always say that a small group class is better than one-on-one individual tutoring, because in a small group class, you're going to see what other people are, where other people are making mistakes, and you can learn from these mistakes. So how can I do this now? How could I break the tie between C and D? Can anybody give me an idea? And by the way, thanks so much, Bo. You have a question in the Q&A box. I will absolutely address it before we close for today. So what do you think? Does anybody have any ideas of how we can break the tie between C and D? If we know it's C or D, we now just have to break the tie. So now somebody's saying we use the unit strategy, but that kind of defeats the purpose because we don't have time for that. So is there anything else we can do? Imagine that now we're down to 2 answer choices only. And that's, by the way, that's also a good habit. Sometimes if you can narrow down the list of answer choices at the last day. Okay. So Edwin is saying what we can do is we can actually understand whether the answer has to be odd or even, because C is even and D is odd. And if we look at the original question, then we know it's 2 even numbers and 1 odd. And if you add 2 even and 1 odd, you're going to have an odd number. And that is why the answer has to be D. And we can do this literally in 30 seconds. And if you build enough confidence on a test, you're going to be able to do this no problem. Takes a lot of time and effort, but it's definitely possible. So that brings us to an important question. And what that is, what really separates people who get 500 scores from people who get 700 plus scores? And I'm going to ask people who actually make the test, make the GMAT. So here's what they're going to say. We're not really out there to test how well you know something, because most of the tests that we've ever done, let's say a history test. Now, at some point, all of us did some sort of a history test. And of course, what was measured? How well we know history. So essentially, what was measured is our memory. But the GMAT is not there to measure our memory. It's not there to measure how well we know business, because people who get into business schools very often don't know anything about business. They go into school to learn it. So instead, what the GMAT tries to measure is your higher order reasoning skills. And these are the skills that really matter. Now, notice how we approach this question. Now, of course, we needed to know some strategies, but we also needed to know how to manage our time well. We needed to know how to be confident enough. We needed to know how to use different strategies, how to think on our feet. So these are the skills that, if you think about it, these are the skills that any successful manager will have. If you think of any person maybe in your workplace who's very, very successful, you would notice they have a series of skills. And many of these skills are the skills you are going to develop further in the business school, but also many of these skills you can actually develop while you're studying for the GMAT. And that's why a lot of business schools, if you talk to the admissions officers, they're going to tell you, well, a good preparation for the GMAT, you can think of this as your first MBA course, kind of like a pre-MBA program, because it really helps you develop these skills. And we hear from many of our clients who are saying, well, I'm so much better at managing my time, or I'm so much better at making decisions at work, or I got a promotion. I don't even have my MBA yet, but because I studied for the GMAT, I took the time to actually develop these skills. And then the score that you get is actually going to be a reflection of how far did you take your skills. And the more advanced they are, the higher is going to be the score. But see, what many people, when they approach the GMAT for the first time, they just follow some old patterns, some old habits. And one of the old habits is what we've learned in school. And because most of the tests we've ever done were knowledge-based tests, subject matter tests, and even most of the tests we're doing now. I mean, if you're doing, let's say, a test in, I don't know, let's say real estate, or a test in financial analysis, a lot of them are really all about knowing certain regulations and certain processes. It's not really about you doing something. And I love analogies. So I'm going to give you a few analogies that hopefully going to help you put things in perspective. But if I want to learn how to play golf, I can go out and read a book by Tiger Woods, how he plays golf. And I'm going to read it cover to cover, and then I'm going to just go and play. Is reading a book going to get me to playing or maybe winning that Ryder Cup? Absolutely not. I'm going to need to put in some time and effort in developing the skill and blood, sweat, and tears. And I'm going to probably have to be hot on that court and do a lot of practice. And most importantly, get a lot of feedback, a lot of coaching, a lot of self-reflection. That's how we get better and better, right? So that's why a lot of people who are very, very successful in sports, they're going to invest a lot of time into this. They're going to have some coaches. And sometimes the coaches are not necessarily better than them, but they see things that they don't see. And here, I'm actually very grateful that for these 2 hours, I'm going to be a coach and hopefully maybe afterwards as well. And here's, by the way, my official score report. I just wanted to show you, just to show you that I'm somewhat qualified to share these ideas. And I've been teaching the GMAT for about 12 years. And I'm showing this to impress you. It impresses me that I was able to get that score. And one of the things that impressed me the most is that it took me 2 weeks to get to a score of 750. Exactly 2 weeks. And if you come to our verbal refresher class, I'm actually going to give you a little bit of a more idea of how exactly I did it in 2 weeks. And our verbal refresher class is in actually 2 weeks from now. So the time that it took me to prepare for the GMAT, that's how long you're going to have to wait until our verbal refresher class on October 14th. But in case you're wondering, Sergey is not a genius by any means. And the reason why is, even though I can always boast that it took me 2 weeks to prepare for the GMAT, it actually took me years to learn the strategies that helped me do well on the GMAT. So things such as the units digit strategy that I've just shown you, things such as the estimating, things such as the odds and evens, the process to elimination. Before I knew what is the GMAT, I already knew these strategies. But it took me a really long time to learn them. I started when I was very young. I started in grade 4, and I learned them all through my middle school and my high school. And of course, then at some point, once I did the 750, the real hard work began. It took me also many years to learn how to teach others these strategies, because there's one thing for me to understand this, but another thing is to teach somebody who wasn't maybe necessarily exposed to this before. Now, what helped me actually, that I got really, really lucky in school. I had amazing teachers, and this was my teacher. I'm really grateful to him for a lot of my understanding of math, because he taught me an out-of-the-box way of approaching math. He was not just teaching us the classes, but he was also training us to compete in different mathematics Olympiads. If you heard of these things, is when you come and you get like 3 hours and you have a bunch of very challenging problems. And it's not like 2 minutes per question. It takes you like an hour to do a question or 45 minutes, because they're really challenging, really tricky. So he was training us, and me and some other people from our class, we did really well on these Olympiads. And that's why when it came time for me to do the GMAT, it was easy. And I'm really grateful to this person. The work that I'm doing right now is more like my tribute to him and to a couple of other teachers in school, because I owe a lot to them. And a lot of kind of my success in standardized tests was really because of the things I've learned at a very young age. But here's what I've discovered as well, is that if you haven't necessarily had amazing teachers in school that trained you for the Olympiad, that's okay, because the GMAT requires a very finite set of skills and a very finite set of strategies. And as long as you keep an open mind and you're prepared to work hard, it is possible to get a very high score within a relatively short period of time. Let me give you just one example. Here's Daria. She was our student about a year ago, and she wanted to go to a very prestigious school in the United Kingdom called London Business School, and she knew that she needed a high score. Well, she started with a very low score. We always recommend taking a diagnostic test. And the diagnostic test, her diagnostic test was not very high, 380. That's in the bottom 10%. And many people might have been discouraged, but Daria said, well, look, I really got to learn these things. And what will help me? As you can see, after she actually did the test and she actually was admitted to the London Business School, she said, look, she wrote these comments on our website, and you can find them in our Google page as well. She said, what I really learned is how to think outside the box, how to manage my time and stress, and how to think like a CEO. Because when you come to our class, we're actually going to, one of the first things we're going to teach you is the GMAT is not a high school test. It's really about thinking outside the box. It's about approaching the question. I'm going to show you some examples today, by the way. It's about approaching questions the way that most people wouldn't. And that's how we get a high score. And we call this thing like a CEO simply because what's an ultimate dream job of somebody who gets into a business school? Well, that's a job of a CEO. And we have sometimes CEOs of some very successful companies, large companies. I was personally working, I was tutoring one client that was a CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. He came in and we started talking about the GMAT. And in the very first session, I kind of laid out to him that this is what the GMAT's really about. And he was trying to study for the GMAT, wasn't really going anywhere before. And as soon as he saw that the GMAT's really all about managing your time, it's about making decisions, it's about knowing how to prioritize, it's about looking for patterns. He's like, this is what I'm doing every day in my work. And that's why here at Admit Master, we want to make sure that when you leave our class, you're going to learn some valuable skills that are going to help you outside of the GMAT as well. Now, if we go back to the structure of the test, you would notice that there are 4 sections, and most of you know that. And usually when I ask people I speak with, what are the 4 sections? I'm going to hear things such as there's a math section, and there's an English section, and a couple more. Well, you would notice here that the GMAT very specifically highlights that this test is going to be about demonstrating our analytical skills, about our reasoning skills, and these are really what the GMAT calls these higher order reasoning skills, right? Higher order means that most people have not done this or haven't been trained how to do this. I noticed that somebody raised their hand. So if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A box or in the chat box, and I'll make sure I address it. Just here in this class, just because of the very large number of people in the class, we've had to mute everybody here in the class. In our normal class, where we have about 15 people, everybody is going to be on unmute, so you're going to be able to speak by just unmuting yourself at any point. But here, if you can just please put your question in a chat box, I'll be sure to address it. Now, the quantitative reasoning and the verbal reasoning sections are the 2 sections that contribute towards the total score. And on the quantitative reasoning section, there are 2 question types: problem solving, data sufficiency. The questions we've seen so far are problem solving questions. And by the way, you might be wondering, well, what is problem solving question all about? It's not really about solving a problem. It's about using our problem solving skills. It is different, and you again see as we do more questions tonight, you're going to see that. Data sufficiency, very strange question. We're going to do 1 question. Your head might be spinning when we're doing this question, but don't worry. Again, we're going to break this down. And in terms of the verbal reasoning section, there are actually 3 types of questions. There are more questions on that section. If you remember the previous slide, there's 36 questions versus 31 on quant. And this is a section we're going to be talking about on October 14th. That's another free verbal refresher class that we do here at Admit Master every month. So please, if you haven't been to that class, make sure that you register on our website and we'll send you a link. Now, these sections, quantitative reasoning and the verbal reasoning sections, are computer adaptive sections. What this means is that the questions get either easier or harder. Let me ask you a question. Would you like your questions to get easier on a test, or would you like your questions to get harder? Do you want to see a lot of easy questions on a test, or would you rather see a lot of hard questions on a test? What do you think? Let me know in the chat box. What would you prefer? Lots of easy questions or lots of hard questions? Okay, some people are saying, I want easier questions. Some people are saying, I want harder questions. Somebody's saying, I'd like the questions to be hard, but easy for me. Okay, that's a really good way of approaching this. So if you see a lot of hard questions, that means you're doing well on the test, because it's an adaptive test. If you're doing well, the questions keep getting harder. So if you are seeing harder questions, that means you're doing well. The only thing is, of course, the GMAT will never tell us whether the question is easy or hard. So please don't try to evaluate whether the question is easy or hard. You'll just drive yourself crazy. Just deal with every question the way it is, but please do remember that questions will get harder and we need to be ready. We need to be prepared how to deal with hard questions, especially because we do not get more time for hard questions. But let me just put your mind at ease. Harder questions don't mean the math is going to be harder. In fact, many people believe that harder questions mean they're going to see lots of probability, lots of combinatorics questions, lots of some very complicated math questions. In fact, this is what some of the GMAT books are going to make us believe, but that is not true. Harder questions are harder simply because they're trickier. I'm going to show you a couple of hard questions where you're going to look at them and say, I don't know what to do. But then once we break them down, you'll realize that the math behind them is actually not that hard. And in fact, we have a lot of our clients who get scores well in the 700s, 750, 760, 770, fairly common. All of them said, you know what? The questions on the 750 level are still about arithmetic, exponents. They're just really, really tricky. So that actually brings me to this question. And this is perhaps where I want to hear your opinion. So let me just launch a very quick poll. We'll just do this in 30 seconds. Why do you think most people find the math on the GMAT hard? If we just said, well, look, it's not really about doing hard math. It's all from middle school for the most part. Why is it hard? We hear, by the way, a lot when we do introduction in our very first class in our 6-week program, and we go around the room or around the Zoom call and ask everybody to introduce themselves. Very often we would hear, well, you know, I have an engineering background and I thought that math is easy. I looked at some questions, looked pretty easy until I did the practice test. And I realized it's actually not that easy. Right? So a lot of people are saying it's been a long time since I've done this sort of math. Questions are very confusing. Time pressure. I have so little time per question. By the way, that's an even bigger problem in verbal. That's why, you know, if you think math is hard, wait till you see verbal questions. Now, I'm not trying to discourage you. There is a way to deal with all of these questions, but just to put things in perspective. So these are all really, really good reasons. Thanks so much for sharing this. So let me show you another question. Let's take a look at the question. This is one of the official questions. I'm going to give you a minute or so to work on this question. And here's how the question, so again, we can continue understanding how the GMAT really works. So here's the question. We have a chart and we have a question and we have 5 answer choices. So the question is about some information in the chart. And of course, one of these 5 answers is the correct answer. So please do not use a calculator. Please don't try to Google this question. Please just do your best. I'm going to give you about a minute, maybe slightly more than a minute, and we'll talk about this question. Wow. In 2 minutes, very, very few people answered that question. So let's do this. And let's just pick an answer. Doesn't matter. I'm going to give you 10 more seconds. Just choose an answer that you think might be right. Doesn't really matter if it is actually the correct answer. Just pick one and we'll talk about this question. So 10 more seconds. All right, let me end the poll. And let me just tell you, fewer than half of the people voted. Let me share the results with you. As you could see, most people are for D. It looks like a nice little rocket that's trying to fly into space, or like an airplane. So D, and a lot fewer people for C and E, nobody for A and B. Challenging question. Now, if this is an official question, the question from the official GMAT guide. So if we were to look at the explanation, here's what we're probably going to see. We have back P, and we have a certain number of marbles in back P. We have back Q, and that's 66.7%. Back R, that's 50%. And that's equal to 1/3 of the total number of marbles. So if we were to add all of the marbles, 37, X, and 32, and take 1/3 of them, this has to be equal to the number on the left, because both of them are representing the number of blue marbles. So that's what the book is going to recommend. And if you feel like, very often I would ask my clients, well, are you a hardworking person? And they will say, well, yes, I am. I work really hard. And to me, that's the hard work. Let's call this the hard work way. And in fact, you might be wondering, is this a hard question? Well, I took the liberty to go to some very popular GMAT forums and ask them, how do they classify this question? And here's what I found. This is a very hard problem. So this is question number 161 from the official guide, the latest edition, and it's classified as a very hard word problem. Basically, this means is that, well, this is a double diamond problem. Experts only, do not come close if you're a beginner. All right, perhaps, but maybe not. See, for this, for the work hard way, I gotta have some math background, and we have a lot of people here who have math background, and yet we'll find out in a few moments how many people actually got this question right. So again, just remember D, C, and E. This is what we had the votes for. So could we do anything else here? Could we maybe approach this question more like managers, more like CEOs, not necessarily like what we did in school? Well, let's see. Let's see what we can do. So there are a couple of steps that we can take. One of the steps that we can take is we can actually calculate the number of blue marbles. So if I have 37 marbles total in the first bag and 10.8% of them are blue, so 10.8% of 37, well, that of course, that number is going to be what? Remember, the marbles are whole marbles, so we can't really divide half a marble, and that's an approximate number, so it has to be 4. 10.8%, 11% of 37, that's 4. 66.7%. What's 66.7%? That's actually 2/3. That's that fraction, 2/3 of X. So if we had X number of marbles in back Q, then 2/3 of them are going to be 66.7%. And then what's 50% of 32? That's of course 16. So what we found is the number of blue marbles is actually going to be 4 plus 16, which is 20, plus 2/3 of X. Okay, so we've done something really simple here, and we just took steps that are somewhat natural of somebody who is well prepared for the GMAT. So let's call this way the work smart way. We've done these steps, and now we're going to start noticing things. What could we notice? Let me ask you a question. What do we know right now about the number of marbles in bag Q? Can anybody tell me in the chat box Is there anything we know about the number of marbles in bag Q? About that number X? Is something we know about that number? Okay, somebody's saying more than 5, it's a larger number. Most of them are blue. It's because it's 2/3, maybe larger than 32. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. See, the one really important thing in the GMAT is knowing what to look for. It is really going to be a game changer. If you know what to look for, just because you've learned this, you've learned and you practiced a lot, then your eyes and your focus is going to go to trying to see that. So let me just show you what we could look for. 2/3 of X. This literally means that the number X, the number of marbles in bag Q, is divisible by 3. That's what it means. So somebody actually mentioned this in the chat box. Congratulations that you've noticed that. Submit. Now let me ask you a question. What answer choices are divisible by 3? Or better yet, what answer choices are not divisible by 3? Well, 5 is not divisible by 3, so we can eliminate 5. 23 is not divisible by 3. Remember, that was the most popular answer. And 46 is also not divisible by 3. So now, by just doing that, we've already narrowed down the list of answer choices to 2, 9, and 12. So let me now ask you a question. We have 2 answer choices left. What we can do, we can just try them out. How about we just try out one of them, and we just pretend that X is that number? See, because we have a chart, we can just plug in that number back into a chart and see what happens, and see if it's actually the right answer. So let me actually try. Let me pretend that the answer is C. I just think it's C. Maybe C stands for correct answer. And honestly, it doesn't really matter, because if C is right, that's good. If C is wrong, it's also good. I have only one left, right? If I'm down to 2 answer choices, I'm never going to test both of them. I just test one of them. So let me take a look at C. So if this is 12, look at the chart above, then 2/3 of 12 is 8. And now I can calculate the totals. So the total of all of these total marbles is going to be 81, 37 plus 12 plus 32. And the total blue is going to be 28. Let me ask you a question. Is 28 1/3 of 81? Yes or no? Because that's what I'm looking for. I want these things to work out. I want 1/3 of the marbles to be blue. So is 1/3 of 81 28? It's actually a very easy question. Here's why. Almost. Yeah, exactly, Diego. Almost, not quite. Almost is good, and very often it would be good, but here it's not good enough. And here's why. But I like the way you're thinking. So here's what we can do. 81 is some odd number, because if I'm adding 37, 12, and 32, I'm going to get an odd number. And 4, 8, and 16 is an even number, and an even number can never be 1/3 of an odd number. So that is why C is not the right answer. So what is the right answer? Well, it has to be B, has to be 9. So let me ask you a question. How much algebra did we do here in this question? And because of so much algebra that we do, what's the chance that we're going to make some sort of a mathematical mistake? I mean, calculating 2/3 of 12 is really as hard as it gets. We didn't even need to add up all these numbers. We just needed to realize whether they're odd or even. And most importantly, which of these approaches would you enjoy more? You prefer to work hard, or do you prefer to work smart? And what do you think a successful manager or CEO would do? That's kind of an obvious answer. Now we keep talking about this thinking like a CEO. So let's do another question. I hope you enjoyed this question. Very hard question, but you can see how knowing what to look for and knowing what to do just makes this question easy. But that's the hardest part for many people. Even if we know the theory, and even if we learn the strategies, if we don't know how to apply them, and all of them are useless. Let's take a look at another question. Let's actually do a data sufficiency question now. I promised we're going to do a data sufficiency question. So let's do one now. And we'll see if we can use our thinking like a CEO approach. So here's how the data sufficiency question is going to look like. By the way, if you have never seen a data sufficiency question, then don't worry, you're going to see one now. But here's how we're going to look, how it is going to look like. We're going to have a question and two statements. And the answer choices are not going to give us any numbers. Instead, the answer choice is simply going to say information in statement 1 is enough to answer the question, but information in statement 2 is not enough to answer the question, right? So that's how they look like, and there's a different combination of statements. So as you're going through this question, please do not feel compelled to actually find an answer. Your job is not to find the answer. Now, this is a question, by the way, that's unique to the GMAT, and it's actually patented, so it cannot appear in any other test except for the other tests that the GMAT offers, like an executive assessment test, for example. But this is a question that's very management question, because you're not actually going to always do the work yourself when you're a manager. You just need to understand if it is possible to do the work. And that's really what it's all about. So please take a look. Take a look at the passage, take a look at the question, take a look at the statements, and answer the following question. Is the information in statement 1 sufficient to answer this question? Then look at statement 2, do the same thing. And if you feel like each statement individually is not enough, then you need to look at these two statements combined and see if the information in both statements together would be necessary in order to answer this question. So here you go. Of about a minute. All right. If you haven't chosen the answer yet, please choose an answer now. We're going to continue playing this game that there aren't really wrong answers here in this class, that the right answers and the answers we can learn from. I'm going to give you 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let me end the poll right now and share the results with you. So as you could see, most people said it is C. Some people said it is D. Very few people said it's B and E, and nobody was actually for A. So let's see. The most popular answer is very obviously, overwhelmingly C. So let us see if that is the right answer. This is, by the way, another question from the official GMAT guide. We'll come back to talking about the official GMAT guide in just a moment. But because it is an official question, it comes with explanation. So by the way, here's the explanation. Let R be the regular price and D be the discounted price and P1 be the first profit and P2 be the second profit. And really? Let's look at this question a little bit differently. Let's think like a CEO. And in fact, in this sort of a problem, let's think like a CEO of this store. So imagine we're store managers and we want to sell some shirts. So here's what we're going to do. Somebody who walks into our store and buys 2 shirts, we're going to have a sale. They're going to pay the regular price for the first shirt and the discounted price for the second shirt. And notice that what we're told is the store will make the same profit from the sale of 2 shirts as it will from the sale of 1 shirt. What does this mean? Well, that simply means that the store is making no profit on the sale of the second shirt. The entire profit was made on the first shirt because it was sold at the regular price. This also means that because we're making no profit on the sale of the second shirt, we simply sell that shirt at cost. It costs us, let's say, $10, and we're selling it for $10. The entire profit is made on the first shirt, the regular shirt. But we are happy because we sold the first shirt. The customer is happy because the customer got 2 shirts, and everybody's happy, and maybe we are making a profit. But that's what's going on. So what this literally means is that the discounted price of the second shirt is equal to the cost to the store, right? We're selling the second shirt at cost, and that's our discounted price. That's the cost to us, the store. Notice, by the way, that the question was, what is the discounted price of the second shirt? So now, equipped with this insight, we are going to go to the statements and see which one actually gives us enough information to be able to answer that question. Let's take a look at statement 1. It gives us the regular price of the shirts. Well, the regular price is nice, but it doesn't give us enough information. We would love to know either the amount of the discount or maybe the discounted price or something else. So statement 1 is definitely not sufficient, and nobody actually chose A, so that's great. But let's take a look at statement 2. It tells us that the cost to the store was $12. Well, remember, we just found that the cost to the store is equal to the discounted price, and that's exactly what we need. So statement 2 is sufficient by itself, and that is why the answer is B. Only statement 2 is sufficient, and we do not need to combine them. The regular price is actually not that important. The question was never asking us about the regular price. It was asking us about the discounted price. And to calculate the discounted price, all we needed to know is that our profit is 0, and we're simply selling it at cost. And we know the cost from statement 2. So that's what we call think like a CEO, right? Again, notice how much math we've done. Did we actually do the $R, the $P1, and all of these things? Well, not really. That's why when we talk about the official guide in a moment, I'm actually going to show you how you can use it. There's a very, very good way of using it, and there are bad ways of using it. By the way, doing this on a test and really thinking that way will require us to learn things that perhaps we've never learned before. And it will require us to build some confidence. Building a confidence is really, really important. Let me show you an example. I was just speaking with this person today. Her name is Darini. She just started her program at Oxford Side Business School. She's happy, happy, happy. Just amazing, amazing program and a really good fit for her. And she was trying to actually do this for about 4 years. She was thinking about the MBA, and she told me that I have all these GMAT books and I was trying to study and I was trying, but I didn't see any result. And she was just completely losing confidence that she can ever do this. But what she found is that the way to build confidence is to have a plan, is to have a structure of step-by-step how I can do it. I cannot just wake up one day and just say, oh, but all of a sudden I have confidence in doing this. I know the strategies, I know exactly what to look for, I know how to do it, and I'm confident enough to do it. Because the GMAT is going to play tricks with me. I need to be prepared. And that's why Bo was asking, well, if I take the GMAT multiple times, how long should I prepare for the first one, and what's the recommended time between the first and the second? And so for Darini, she actually had exactly the same thing in mind. Because she was trying to study for such a long time, she said, look, I'm going to take the test 3 times. That's my goal. I'm gonna take it once, then about a month and a half later, the second time, and a month and a half later, the third time. But in her plan, the plan that we gave her, it was actually never a part of a plan, because our goal is to help you do the test for the first time from the first attempt. And I know it doesn't always work, and some people need to go for the test again, but because you're going to be doing a lot of practice tests, by the time you go for the real test, you will actually be ready for the real test. That's why most people, most of our clients do the test just once, unless something really strange goes on that day. Right? And what was important here for Darini also, she really needed to enjoy the process, because it was such a long time that she was getting discouraged and demotivated that she needed to have a plan. And in fact, for her, the plan was she needed to do a certain number of questions. And for everybody who comes to our class, we're going to help you understand how to measure your progress. And it's different for different people. And I'm going to get to this in a moment, and I'll show you exactly what this means. But for Darini, the way to measure the progress was not how many questions she got right, but how many questions she can go through. Because very often when you're starting your preparation, if you count your progress by how many questions you get right, you're going to very, very quickly get demotivated. Because guess what? If you don't know how to do something, it is very easy to give up. In fact, let me use another analogy. And that is, if you've ever tried to learn something new, let's say play golf. Some people are saying, well, look, all you need to do to master a new skill is to practice. So if you practice, you're going to get perfect. Well, guess what? If I don't know how to play golf, and I'm just going to go and show up at a golf course and just keep practicing, every time I do it, every time I'm going to be making mistakes. And at some point, I'm just going to get super frustrated and I'll give up. And this happens a lot on the GMAT. In fact, let me show you some very, very interesting chart that was shown to us by the GMAT. So every year, us and a few other test prep organizations, we get invited to the GMAT headquarters, and the GMAT shares a few things with us, some really interesting insights about the test. They never share the real questions with us, by the way. That would be illegal, but they do share some really interesting insights. And this is what they shared. They said, well, look, do you actually know how many people every year think about going to a business school? The GMAT has a few websites such as MBA.com or businessbecause.com or the MBAtour.com. And they say, well, every year we have 7 million people who are going to these websites, researching, 7 million unique visitors researching about business schools because they're hoping to get into a business school. And of them, 2 million people actually create an account on MBA.com. They either download some practice tests or they buy a GMAT book. Now, guess how many people, having all the best intentions about studying for the GMAT, I'm going to go and learn how to play golf, right? I'm going to learn how to really ace this test. Guess how many people actually show up for the real test? 10%. So 90% of people, they feel like that person who just threw the crabs into the lake. They just say, oh, that's not for me, super hard. And it's for a few reasons. And one of these reasons would be they haven't really learned how to study for this test. And they haven't really learned how to measure their progress. And of that, of the 200,000 people, only 12% achieve scores of 700 or more, which are the scores that most people would want to get if they want to go to a top school. So if we look at where we started, 7 million people, and where we landed was just about 24,000 people who got scores of 700, that's 1 in 300. I don't know about you, but in some lotteries, you can get better chances. Now, 1 in 300 is not great. That means if I want to get into a business school, the chance of me actually getting a score of 700 is 1 in 300. No, I want much better odds. So what do a lot of people do when they study for the GMAT? They say, okay, a test. How do I study for the test? Well, how did we study for other tests before? I need books. Which books do I need? And many people saying, well, how about the official GMAT guide? So now when I buy a pack of 3 official GMAT guides, I have the the big guide and the verbal and the quant, and now I get the computer software and the mobile software and all of these things. I say, okay, now if I just go through these books, I'll be ready. But what they don't realize is that this is essentially just a question bank. It is the set of questions from the past exams with really terrible explanations. And I've shown you some of the explanations today. And by the way, we've asked, when I was at this conference, we've asked the GMAT, people who make these questions, well, why are the questions explanations so terrible? And basically they said, well, look, we can't really teach people the tricks because everybody's thinking differently. And that's why you guys are here for. But what we need to do is we need to explain why this is the right answer. Because if somebody, let's say, decides to take us to court and say, I don't believe that this is the right answer, well, here's an explanation. The explanation is written by somebody maybe with a PhD in math. They're going to say, okay, this is how I usually prove things. You know, it might take me 10 minutes to do that, maybe half an hour, but you know, who cares? I'm not here to do the test. I'm simply to explain why this is the right answer. That is why I know you're probably going to take this advice with a pinch of salt, but please don't. Please take this advice at the face value. It is my best intention. Make sure you have these books. And if you take our course, we're going to give you these books. The big official GMAT guide, it is included as part of our course. But make sure you do study with these official guides because this is the only source of real questions from past exams. But make sure you don't read explanations because the explanation will simply help you develop a lot of bad habits. And that's not how we're going to approach these questions anyway, because this is all about the theory. That's all about calculating 16 to the power of 6, right? But we need the strategy. So where do we get the strategies from? Well, at this point, many people are going to say, okay, because we learned how to study with the books, you know, that's our vision. We're going to go and get strategy books. So what are the strategy books? Well, you've probably seen these books, you know, maybe these books, or maybe these books, or maybe these books. And see, the thing about the strategy books is very, very simple. The strategy books are written by the test prep organizations, such as ours, that would then be used in the class. So we have a strategy book that we use in our class, but we don't even sell this book on Amazon. If you want to buy our book, you cannot do that. And there are a few reasons for that. But we're not really interested in selling our books because we know that the book doesn't have what we need. And every other test prep organization is going to do the same. Is they want you to buy the book and then come to the class. That's the whole idea because the book is a supplement to the course. That's how it was originally developed. And then some test prep organizations said, well, why don't we take this book and actually publish it and sell it on Amazon? There's only one problem. If you do that, you cannot use any real questions in the book that you sell on Amazon. So that's why they would have to use a lot of simulated questions that are not real questions from past exams. And that kind of defeats the purpose because we want the real questions, right? So we don't sell our books. We use a lot of official resources in our class. That's why we use real questions in a class. And these are the best questions that you can study with. But what is really the problem with studying with books? And the books are, by the way, the books are very valuable for certain parts. First of all, the books teach us the theory. When you come to our class, we're going to assign certain readings from the book that are actually going to help you remember the theory. But guess what? The entire theory of the GMAT fits on about 50 pages in a book. You can probably cover it in 2 days. But the majority of the books, they have a lot of different kind of things, but they don't really tell us what's really important. And just like I mentioned, the books are written by test prep organizations. There's nothing wrong with that. This is just how things work. Right? The books were written as supplements to the course, always. That was the entire intention originally of these books. And if you don't believe me, you can just go on these websites and try to register for the course. You're going to learn that as part of the course, you're going to get a book and you can buy the same book on Amazon. Now, of course, with a book, you can't really ask questions if something is unclear. But here's the biggest problem, that even if the book had everything that we need, and even if it had the best intention, even if the book can give us some feedback and tell us what we're doing wrong, the problem is that only about 10% of people statistically read past the first chapter in any self-help book. I have a lot of self-help books. I'm guilty. Many of these books, I just read past the first chapter. Or I didn't read, I just read the first chapter. So that's unfortunately the problem. So how do we actually study? We also said that practice doesn't necessarily make perfect, but what can we do? What is the actual process? We can also go and just simply learn the strategies by observing other people to do the questions. For example, you can come to a class or you can work with a private instructor and the instructor can show you how to do it. You can watch a YouTube video and the YouTube video will show you how to do the questions. But see, here's something really, really important. And that is, I can watch somebody else do this, but is this going to make me a good, let's say, golfer? If I watch somebody really experienced, and this is, I don't remember exactly who is this guy, but he's one of the best golf players in the world. So if I take lots of notes, but I don't apply it, it's not going to work. So what is really the best way to learn this? Well, we're going to have to learn some theory. We are going to have to use the books. That's important. That's why we give you books as part of our course. But the books are going to have some theory as well as questions to practice on. Then you're going to learn how to actually apply these strategies. That's what we learned here today. If you come to our class, we're going to actually show you how to do this. But here's something that's going to be really important that we're going to do. We'll get you to practice this. Because at the end of the day, I cannot show up at the test and do that for you. Once I show you a few times how to do the questions, I'm going to get you to practice and I will want to give you some feedback. And you'll perhaps be in study groups with others and they're going to give you feedback. And that is really, really important. And this process really has to be done in this order. At first, you learn some theory. And in fact, if you come to our course, and I know some of you here are registered for our course already, you've probably noticed that we gave you access to our website where you are already doing a lot of exercises to get ready for classes, some really basic exercises. The next step is you're going to come to a class, we're going to show you a lot of strategies, and then you're going to practice. You'll practice in class. That's why our classes are about twice as long in terms of the number of hours as most other courses. And then we'll get you to hear some feedback. Now, just to give you a very, very quick 30 seconds review of history, our company, AdmitMaster, has been around since 1998. It was before I joined this company. And for the first about 10 years or so, this company was offering almost entirely just private tutoring. And private tutoring works really well. You would come in, you would have a personal coach. The coach is going to show you, teach you everything, adapt to your learning style, give you lots of feedback, give you homework every week, and you're going to come every week for 2 to 3 hour session. And then in a few months, you're going to be ready for the test. And different people learn at different speeds. So worked amazingly, and the instructors were really, really professional with many years of experience. There was only one problem. By the time that all of our students were done, each of them spent somewhere between $5,000 to $10,000. And there were only so many people that the instructors can work with. So what we did about 12 years ago, 10 years ago, when I joined this company, we said, okay, there's certain things that are actually much better done in a group. But instead of trying to just make up another group class, why don't we create a program that's going to have a combination of some group learning and some individual learning? So we don't want to give up all this feedback. We want to keep the classes small. In fact, even right now, our classes are live, and this class isn't as interactive, even though we were able to interact through the Q&A and through the chat box, and we'll interact even more. We're going to have some opportunity to ask more questions. But in our live class, you're all going to be on webcams, and you're going to have a mute button and unmute button, so you can always ask a question. And our class is not 2 hours, it's 4 hours, and it's twice a week. So we get to practice a lot. And guess what? We're going to give you all the study materials. In fact, if you are anywhere in North America, Canada, or the United States, we're going to ship you the physical books. If you're outside of North America, which a lot of our clients are right now, we're going to give you electronic books, and we'll give you a chance to come back and retake the class completely free for 1 year. You're going to have a personal coach all throughout your program that's going to check up on you. You're going to have 3 private classes, private sessions, where we're really going to fine-tune your skills. And essentially, we're here to coach you until you're done. We have office hours every week, and we have some people who need a lot of improvement who just keep coming every week. In fact, right now they're twice a week. So imagine you're getting like very almost individual tutoring. They usually like 3, 4, 5 people in these sessions, and you can get these for up to a year. And what we were able to do is, instead of saying, well, there's going to be $10,000, because now a lot of the things you would have to learn anyway, the instructor can explain to 10, 15 people at the same time, not to one person. And it's exactly the same thing we have to explain and get you to practice and get you to share. So that's why we could reduce the cost of the program to about $1,500 if it's in Canadian dollars. And if it's in US dollars, it's about $1,300. And if you look at really the value that you're getting with this, it's just amazing, because, and there's some early bird discounts, by the way. Our next course is October 19th. So if you were to choose to join that class, we'll give you that $200 early bird discount. We do have another class starting this Saturday. Unfortunately, this class is pretty much full. So if for whichever reason you need to join this class, let us know. But we're pretty much at the place where we would like to be in terms of the number of students in class. We don't want the class to be too big. But if you are interested in joining like right away, you cannot wait, just send me an email or send me a private message, and we'll see what we can do. But here's our next class, October 19th. That's an evening class, Eastern time zone, or the next weekend class is in the morning and weekend, Saturday, Sunday. That's going to be in November, and you can still get that $200 early bird discount. So there are a lot of things included. In fact, if you were to do any sort of a comparison shopping, you would probably notice that for the number of hours you get in class, for the additional study resources and private tutoring that's included as a part of a course. You don't pay extra for this, GMAT books, and we even will give you some help with your MBA application. We'll review your resume, we'll give you feedback. So all of that's like $5,000. But the regular price of our course is $16.99 Canadian, and with a sale price, it's $14.99. You don't even have to pay everything up front. It's just a $500 deposit to reserve your seat. And then you can pay the rest as we get a little closer to the course, but we'll get you all of the preparation materials up front so that you're going to start getting ready for classes. This is going to be very, very important. Now, speaking about return on investment, we see our students achieving average entrance scholarships of about $15,000. So think about getting 10 times in your money in the stock market. You know, maybe it was possible a year ago, not really very easy to do right now. But that's something that we see a lot among our students. And if you get a higher score, then the return on investment is even greater. One of our students recently got a scholarship, an entrance scholarship, $170,000 US. It was an actual entrance scholarship one of our students got from the NYU Stern Business School. Now, this is an option that's the most popular, and this is an option that comes with the unconditional guarantee. So as long as you need help, as long as you continue preparing, we're going to be here with you. We do have other options as well. There's an option to study completely by yourself, where we are going to give you all of our strategies, and you can have access to this self-prep program anywhere from 1 month to 12 months. We typically recommend about 6 to 12 months if you're studying completely by yourself, unless you need a very small score improvement, and it is very affordable. So it is from about $49 to about $100 a month, and you can pay by month, so you can prepay a few months in advance. There's a live class, which with the discount is going to be, there's an extra $200 discount. And there's also a program that's somewhat blended, where you're going to be mostly studying by yourself, but there is a coach. Right? So remember, with the live program, you have a personal coach that works with you all throughout your preparation, that's available by phone and email, and you have some private sessions, but you still come into a live group class. With the middle option is you are studying by yourself using our videos, but you have that coach all throughout your preparation. So you can find all of that information at admitmaster.com/offer. Now, many people are asking, well, you know, how long is it going to take me? So here's some information about how long it typically takes, but of course, it is very personal, it is very individual. One thing that I hear often is many people are saying, well, you know, I got lots of time. I got 2 years to prepare for the GMAT, or I'm not really there to do my MBA anytime soon, so don't need to think about this right now. Well, here's the thing. Some of us can dedicate a lot of time studying for the GMAT. I was speaking with one of our clients who's joining our class this weekend, and she was saying, look, I got 40 hours a week, so I can spend as much time as I possibly can. But we also have some people who are saying, well, I only got like 5 hours a week, so it will take me a long time. Remember, the GMAT exam results are valid for 5 years. And honestly, I'll be honest with you, okay? I love the GMAT. I think it's a very interesting test and we can learn a lot. But I'm not a fool. I imagine that most people don't really like the GMAT. You got other things to do in life. So if you can get the GMAT score faster with less effort, and if you can work smart and still working hard, you can do some other things. And you can enjoy time with your friends, or you can maybe learn some new things. You can learn how to code. You can learn how to day trade. Doesn't matter. There's so many other ways to spend your time. And that's what we will actually hear from a lot of CEOs. So one of the things that you remember I mentioned that one of the skills of CEOs is that CEOs really value the time because they know time is money. And that's why they get paid so much. And so time is really important. Think about time management as one of the most important skills you're going to have in your MBA program, and one of the most important skills you're going to develop while you're studying for the GMAT. Let me show you one final example. Here's another GMAT question. Here's the question. The ratio of pigs to chickens on a certain farm is 13 to 28. When 15 pigs were added to the farm, the ratio of pigs to chicken became 4 to 7. What was the original total number of pigs and chickens on this farm? Now, many people are going to say, wait, slow down. Let me read it again. Well, here are the answer choices, by the way. So what a lot of people are going to do is they'll say, okay, well, I know the ratio. So the ratio is kind of just the ratio. I can have 13 and 28, or I can have 130 and 280. So I have some sort of a multiplier. Therefore, I have 13 n pigs and 28 n chickens. But once I add 15 pigs, now I have 13 n plus 15 pigs, right? For all of you, my engineering friends, then you know exactly what I'm doing right now. If you're not comfortable with math, you're like, wait a second, let me take some notes. So here's a new ratio. And then, of course, we need to solve it and find n. A few minutes later, calculate the number of pigs, the number of chickens, add them up, and boom, the answer is B. Looks good, right? Okay, what else can we do? Well, we already know that this theory way is very often not the best way because it just takes so much time and it's so frustrating, honestly. I have a master of math and I don't like that way. So let's look at something different and this question from a different perspective. Let's look at it from the mastery way. So here's what we can do. Now, what we've learned from this question is that we have a ratio of pigs to chickens, which is 13 to 28. What this means is that for every 13 pigs, we have 28 chickens. This means that the number of pigs must be divisible by 13. And the number of chickens must be divisible by 28 because that's the ratio. And I cannot have half a chicken. So that's why the ratio has to stay. And that's why the total number of pigs and chickens together must be divisible by 13 plus 28, which is, of course, 41. Well, let me ask you a question. How many answer choices are divisible by 41? The answer choices are pretty close. So, of course, it's only one of them. And it's 40 times 5 is 200. 41 times 5 is 205. We can do this in 30 seconds. See, we didn't even need to add 15 pigs. And honestly, we didn't even need to do anything with the ratio 4 to 7. We just had to recognize things that most people don't really pay attention to. And that's what's going to help us get to a very high score. So we keep track of the success of our students here at Admit Master. And what we notice is that the average scores of our students, and we will ask you to tell us what your score is. And we keep it in a database. Obviously, we don't share it with anyone, but I'm going to share the average with you, and it's 670. And actually, this year, it is going up. So hopefully, we're going to report next year a higher number. And about 35% of our graduates achieve scores of 700 or more. What we found is as we switched from an in-person class to a virtual class about a year ago, and It's, again, very interactive. You're going to see the instructor, you're going to see a whiteboard, and it's going to be a lot of fun being in a class, I promise. And what we find is a lot more of our students get score of 700. A lot more people are showing up for all classes because there's no traffic, there's no snowstorm, and a lot more people are committed. And we find that now almost everybody's actually doing the real test because there are a lot fewer distractions. It's a lot easier to come to a class. In fact, we asked our students, well, we're probably thinking of reopening soon. Would you prefer to come to a class? And guess what? Most of them said, no, we'd rather stay virtual. And not just for the health reasons, but it's just so much more convenient. But of course, we are hoping to be back in person. There's some very clear benefits of doing things virtually as well. Let me give you just a couple of final thoughts. How long is it going to take to get that 700 plus score? Well, here's an example of Brian. He was studying full-time, about 35, 40 hours a week, very committed, very dedicated, was able to improve from 570 to 760 in just 6 weeks. So I needed to study as efficiently as possible because I do not have 6 months. Literally, he was starting a new job in 2 months. He just, I gotta do this right now. Here's another example, Fionn. Fionn was a nurse. Well, she's still a nurse. And many people are saying, well, you know, can a nurse really get a score of 760? She was sitting in a class next to an engineer who was struggling with new ways of approaching questions. And for her, she was just saying, look, I don't know a better way, so I have to learn these strategies. She was able to get a score of 760. Now, it did take her a while, a few months, because she literally can do maybe like 5 hours a week outside of our class. And once the classes were over, I don't have a lot of time because she had 4 jobs, including being a nurse in the emergency room. She ended up with a score of 760. And well, guess what? With 760, she can now do almost anything she wants. So ladies and gentlemen, what's next for you? My goal here was to share with you what are the different ways to prepare, what are some of the strategies you might need to use, and hopefully inspire you a little bit and maybe even entertain you a little bit. I certainly hope sincerely that you're going to join some of our classes, some of our workshops, our next set of virtual classes. We have an evening class from October 19, a weekend class from November 13. That's the only 2 classes that will finish by end of this year. So if you are hoping to do your test before the end of this year, please consider joining these 2 classes. And remember, we are going to give you things to prepare, and you are saving some money by registering in advance. So there's a very clear benefit of doing this, and you don't need to pay everything up front. Our next verbal refresher class is in 2 weeks. If you're still exploring, you're saying, I'm going to just do this sometime in the future, come and join us in our verbal refresher class. If you know you're going to have to do this, you know you're going to have to do the test, one of the best gifts you can give to yourself is take a practice test. Just go to this website, ivy.trygmat.com. Why Ivy? We're doing this class in partnership with the Ivey Business School at Western University. I'm going to introduce to you in a moment my dear friend and the person we've done a lot of these workshops, JD Clark, from the Executive Director of Recruitment from the Ivey Business School. So you can find all of this at admitmaster.com/offer. And guess what? I know many of you are very serious about this. And honestly, I can help you. I can show you the way, but I don't know how important it is for you. What I do know is that only 0.3% of people get scores of 700 or more, and a lot of them are our clients. So if you're serious, if you'd love to chat, then please let me know. If you'd like to see some of the demos, if you'd like to take a look at how our classes work, or if you'd like to just maybe connect one-on-one and talk about your personal goals, maybe show me your resume, talk about some of the decisions you're trying to make, and let me just help you. I'm not going to make a decision for you, but I can just ask you some questions. And then you can decide what is best for you. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, I want to invite you now to stay because you're in for a real treat. I love when JD shares the ideas about how to choose the right school, and most importantly, how to get into the school, because guess what? The GMAT is just one part of the application. It's a very important part, but it's just one part. You're going to have a lot of very important decisions to make, like, do I do an MBA? Where do I do an MBA? And how do I get in? And for that, please help me welcome JD Clark, who's going to share a lot of really valuable strategies with you. Please take some notes. So please help me welcome JD.
Thanks so much, Sergey. Pleasure to be here with you today. And thank you to everyone for joining us for the session. What I'm going to do is over the next probably 20 minutes is give you some tips and tricks as you kind of consider the decision to do an MBA program. And also as you think about putting your best foot forward in the application process. And I'm going to use Ivey as a case study, but a lot of the tips and tricks I'm going to share for you is any MBA application that you put together. I won't go into too much detail about my background, but just to say that I've got lots of experience in working across business programs, across different business schools, but I'd be happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. On my LinkedIn, I share several articles about MBA programs in general, about graduate management education, as well as news about Ivey, but it would be great to be able to connect with you as well. And I know Sergey will share my email address as well to everyone too. I came across this TED Talk a couple of years ago, and it's a really great talk as you think about doing and making a difficult decision. And, frankly, doing the MBA program is a difficult decision. There are actually two decisions you make, right? One is I'm going to do an MBA. And the second one is how do I choose amongst the different programs? And this TED Talk is a great talk as you think about, how do I approach a difficult decision? And Ruth Chang, who gives this TED Talk, has an interesting background. She actually did an undergraduate degree in philosophy, went to Harvard afterwards and did law school at Harvard, and hated doing law school. She actually hated practicing law. She went to law school because it's like, what do I do with a philosophy degree? She quit being a lawyer, went back, did her PhD in philosophy, and really did, as part of her research, this whole study about difficult decisions and hard choices. She talks about three things in the video that I think are really, really relevant as you think about the decision to do an MBA program. The first is she actually defines what is a difficult decision, and that's really covered in this quote. And to put it in sort of simple terms, anytime that you're doing a pros and cons list, it's a difficult decision. The second thing that she talks about is when we're faced with a difficult decision, at times what happens is we actually will default to the easiest choice. And it's not necessarily the best choice, but we get overwhelmed and sometimes we take the easiest choice. And so if we think about doing an MBA program, the easiest choice is actually not doing one. You're not quitting your job. You're maybe not moving to a new location. Maybe if you're an international student, moving to a new country. So I'd really encourage you as you think about this decision is always do that check with yourself. Am I making the best decision or am I making the easiest decision? The second thing that she talks about is the framework you should approach the third thing, the last thing is how you approach a difficult decision is really thinking about what are those things important to me? And, and evaluating the different decisions based on those important criteria. But always start with that, that question about what matters most to me. And I'm going to talk to you about what matters most to us here at Ivey, but I'm also going to talk to you about rankings because we always get questions, how should I look at rankings? And our advice is don't look at just an overall ranking. Look at the components of the rankings because all of these rankings are really based on, data that the school gives, but also survey results that these publications do to alumni that have experience in the program. And so it's a great way to kind of get a feeling about, and really evaluating what matters most to yourself as you think about making this decision. At Ivey, what's important, and I'm going to show you sort of in the next slide here, the importance of kind of thinking about what matters most to you. And I'm going to use Financial Times rankings on it. So one of the things Financial Times does is they go out and they actually ask the students, were you employed 3 months after graduation? They also ask for data from the school about corporate social responsibility core courses. So for us, we don't have a core course in social responsibility because it goes across all the different courses. So it's actually woven into all the core courses that we have. They also look at faculty that are published in the top FT or Financial Times 50 journals. They also look at a second language requirement. It's very unusual for a North American business school to have a second language requirement, but you do see that in Europe. And so if you have a second language requirement, you actually benefit from the rankings. There's an international advisory board. So we have an advisory board of Ivey made up of about 60 alumni, some international, some domestic, but we would get points if our advisory board are made up of all international students, alumni. And then they also look at percentage of female faculty members being 50%, not 48%, not 47, it has to be 50 or higher. So if you look at all those bottom factors, this top one is always one of the most important to people. That's 2% of the overall rankings. And the bottom ones all count for 20%. So this is why you have to look past the overall number, rankings and look at the components that matter most to us. So we rank in Financial Times #1 in Canada with our employment rate 3 months after graduation. But what's also important to us at Ivey is, what is the experience that you had going through the program, the impact it had on you personally and professionally, as well as what do recruiters think of a talent coming out of our program. That's the most important thing to us. The education and program that we deliver, the impact that it has on you personally and professionally, but also recruiters that recruit students out of our program, what do they think of the talent that they are recruiting? So one of the things we're really proud of is the Economist ranking. And so the Economist goes out and they rank the top 100 global business schools. And they actually ask them various questions of alumni about, what was your education experience like? So for 4 years in a row, out of those 100 business schools, we've been ranked top 10 globally. The other thing they do is ask a bunch of questions about, how, when you were in the program, the support that you received from the career management centers. So for 5 years in a row, and the last ranking that they did, we ranked number 11. The worst that we've all done in this category is number 16. But again, a strong track record 5 years in a row of being in the top 20. This is Bloomberg Business Week. And the ranking that they did just before, they didn't do one last year because of COVID, but the one that they did before was around, and what they do is Business Week goes out and they rank US schools, and then they rank any school outside the US, called their international rankings. And they rank about 131 schools. That's about how many schools are ranked. But one of the things they do is they ask various questions to recruiters, alumni, this whole aspect of networking. So they ask recruiters around what's the talent like coming out of the program. They ask alumni about what was the networking opportunities when you were a student, when you were alumni. So that score for networking, when you combine the two rankings out of 131 business schools, we are number 15th globally. So it speaks to the recruiters, but also the support that you receive from the alumni network as a student, but also beyond graduation. So those are some of the things that we're proud of here at Ivey, and it really fits with what matters most to us. So what I'm going to talk to you about is who is an Ivey MBA and give you a sense. So I'm going to talk about it in a very high level sense, but I do want to share with you, I would encourage you as you look at various MBA programs is never self-select yourself out. Never sit there and say, I'm not a candidate for this particular school. We're here, engage with us, talk with us. We'll talk to you about your profile, where you want to go in your career and see if there's a fit, but never ever self-select yourself out. Never ever self-select yourself out if you think you're not an MBA candidate. I share this all the time because it's very personal to me. I have a degree in history. I never worked in a formal business background. And so I never thought I was an MBA candidate. I did my MBA on the older end of the demographic. And the reason is, and the one regret I had is I wish I did it earlier. And the reason I didn't do it earlier is I self-selected myself out. I'm not really a typical MBA candidate. There is no typical MBA candidate. What we're looking for is tomorrow's leaders. And tomorrow's leaders come from all different backgrounds in their education and in their work experience. So on a very high level, we have in our program about 150 students a year. So relatively a small program, split into 2 sections. So we have 2 sections of our program. So about 50% of our class are born in Canada, 50% outside of Canada. We have 30% of our students coming in as study visas. 25 different passports are represented, 24 different birth countries. So very, very international. 42 different industries represented, which is fantastic. 38% female. Work experience ranges from 2 to 10 years. We come in at about 5.5, and then the average work experience at 28.5. On our website, we have more details about the education background and everything else. But the danger of looking at class profiles is you can look in there and say, oh, I don't know, there's not many people that may look like my background. And again, never ever self-select yourself out, that diversity is important. And remember, what programs are looking for is tomorrow's leaders. What I'm going to do is talk to you about the application process. And here are the 5 things that we look at in Ivey, but you're going to find this very, very consistent across all different schools. So what we're going to do is walk through each of these and provide more tips and tricks around it. So we're going to talk about what's the leadership and experience and potential, and how do I kind of, present that in the application, and what is that type of experiences that individuals are looking for, as you think about your professional experience and applying for an MBA. We're going to talk about references. We're going to talk about your previous academic experience, which a lot of schools look at in combination with the GMAT or GRE. I'm not going to talk much about the GMAT because Sergey went through it, and then I'm going to end with some tips around the admissions interview. So let's talk about work experience. So you will find that most top MBA programs are going to ask for full-time work experience. So we have a minimum of 2 years. You're going to find that pretty consistent across programs. Again, the average comes in at about 5. And that's really driven by recruiters. What recruiters want from individuals coming out of MBA programs is they want them to have some work experience before doing their MBA. There are different schools that require, how do I talk about my work experience? You're going to find most schools in the application form is going to ask information about your work experience. But what you're going to find with the application form is this is really where you'll put, what do I do? What's my job description? What am I responsible for? Some bullet points or paragraph forms around it. So from this date to this date, here's my title, here's my organization, here's some things that I do. The other thing that you're going to do is you're either going to provide a resume. Some schools will put a letter of introduction. At Ivey, we ask for a resume. And this is really an opportunity where you can talk more about your work experience. And you want to talk about very much about the impact and accomplishments you've had, less about what you do. So you want to talk about how you've done your job and those impact and accomplishments that you're quite proud of. At Ivey, we don't have a resume template for you. The reason that we don't do that is we want you to make sure, and we don't have a page limit as well. We want to make sure that you have that freedom to kind of talk about your work experience as much as you want, not to be constrained around that. But I'm going to talk in the next slide about what are some of those experiences you should highlight. But before I do that, I want to set it up. That when you're applying for an MBA program, what you want to do is, it's very easy for us to talk about what we do. It's a lot harder and take some thought when we think about what are those accomplishments and impact that I make in the organization. And you really want to focus on that for your application. So here is just some things to give you some examples of what you can include. Think about those times you showed initiatives, your ability to get things done, where you've had to figure things out yourself and self-manage. Maybe you brought some big picture thinking. Maybe the organization should think about this. So somewhere where you maybe have contributed strategically. Teamwork. So where have you worked in teams, had to get things done through others? Maybe it's opportunities, and teamwork can take, maybe you were generous with a team member and coaching them. Maybe you had difficulties with a team member and you kind of had to work it out. But you're going to find in many MBA programs, because teamwork is an important part of the academic part of it, it's also a very important part that recruiters work after, that you're going to be probed on describing some of your teamwork. Where you've had to persuade and communicate. What a lot of people do is talk about ideas that they had that they may have had to sell in their organization, and where you had to make and assist with decisions. And I put assist in there because for many individuals early in their career, they're not at that chance where they're making decisions. And I had a conversation with a candidate about a year ago, and I said to them, they said, well, I don't make decisions. I said, do you make recommendations? They were in a senior analyst role. He said, all the time. I'm making, I look at data and and I said, well, then you're making decisions. And do they act on your recommendations? Yeah, most of the time. I said, well, then you're assisting and making decisions. And we're here to solve problems, right? And so those are, this is not all what we're looking for. You don't have to have all of these, but what we're doing is providing you some context and examples of some of those things you might want to include as you think about your impact and accomplishments and putting it forward in an application. References are an important part of your application. Each school does it differently. Some schools have letters. Some schools have forms people fill out. How it works at Ivey is we actually have a form. It's part of our online application. You would see the form, you would fill in your references information, and then you would execute sending the form to them, and they would complete the form and send it back to us. But we always get questions about, who should I choose for my references? And so it's really important. Different schools have different requirements they have. Here at Ivey, we ask for a minimum of 2 references, at least one of them to be professional in nature. And they could be, a colleague you worked with or a boss that you worked with currently or in the past. But we want at least one to be professional in nature. And, the best advice I have about references is what you want to do is, as you think about those key accomplishments and impact that you're going to highlight in your organization, pick references that can speak to your character and abilities, and that actually the better that you have alignment with the work experience you're highlighting and the references that have observed your character and abilities and some of those impact and accomplishments that you've done. So the best thing to do is really kind of make sure you have that alignment with your references to the things you're highlighting in your application. You want to meet with your referee early. You want to talk to them about why you're doing an MBA program. You want to provide them with a deadline. So for us at Ivey, you don't need your references when you submit your application, but we do need it when we make the final decision. So we like to have it within about 10 days upon submission of your application. But again, each school is different. I'd ask a lot of questions around it, but that's sort of how we do it. But I think the key advice, and you're going to hear this from all schools, is the more that you can, do alignment between the work experiences you want to highlight in your application and interview to your references. That's the key thing to kind of remember. Previous academic experience. This is interesting. So I will share another reason why I delayed my MBA studies is I had horrible grades in my undergrad. I did a program of study, although I really enjoyed history in high school. I didn't enjoy it much in university. And I was also immature at the time as well. So my grades weren't good. And so, it's interesting. I have a daughter that just started college this month, and, there's pressure on grades when you're in high school, and then you get out. And then, when you go to university, you can't go to graduate school without grades. But one of the things in MBA programs that's great is we have this thing called the GMAT. And so what we do, and we're going to be very similar to other schools, is we look at the GMAT in combination with your academic experience. So if you have poor grades in your undergraduate degree, there is nothing you can do about that to change it. But what you can do is write a strong GMAT. And I can tell you, as somebody that has looked at thousands of MBA applications, and I'm probably, I don't know how many over the 25 years I've been working in MBA programs, but I can tell you that if you write a strong GMAT, we're not even concerned about your grades, because really what we're looking for in the GMAT and your grades is your academic capability. And you can, compensate having low grades by writing a strong GMAT. So we do, we always get questions, what do we consider your grades? And we look at your last 2 years of your most recent degree. So that's how we do it. Again, no minimum GPA, but the class average is B or mid 70s, so 75 to 78. We also consider the program of study, and I'll use myself as an example. I did a history degree. I had no quantitative courses that were in my undergraduate degree studies. So there was much more emphasis on the quantitative portion of my GMAT. If you're coming from an engineering background, we put less emphasis on the quantitative part of the GMAT, maybe look more at the verbal. But again, the key thing is that don't worry if you have poor grades, you can compensate for that by writing a strong GMAT. Our average GMAT score, you may have mentioned it already, Sergey, so I apologize if I duplicated, is around the 665 range. 665, but there is a wide range of scores, anywhere from 520 on the low end to 780 on the high end. So again, the GMAT is just one of those considerations that we look at. I'm going to talk about essay questions a little bit. You're going to find most schools will ask for video essays. So this is how it works for us, is we have a bank of 50 questions. You're going to receive the questions, and then you're going to have to think on your feet and answer them. They are getting acquainted questions. They are nothing that is technical in nature. So they're things like, what would I do if you were given a day off all of a sudden? So this is really an opportunity for you to personalize your application. Here are some tips around it. You'll have the opportunity to test the technology ahead of time. There's actually a practice question. You want to find a quiet space, give yourself about 30 minutes, It doesn't take that long, but what happens is you're given a question, and then you're given about a minute to 30 seconds to think about your response and a minute to respond back, and you got 2 questions. So really, by the time you get settled to the end, it's about 15 minutes, but you don't want to feel rushed, so give yourself 30 minutes to complete it. You want to dress professionally. You want to make sure that, treat it like an interview. Again, there's no right answer for it, and being nervous is normal. We are asking you to think on your feet. So being nervous is normal. Don't worry if you don't think that you have perfection on it. Written essays. So most schools will provide a couple of written essays that are required. Many schools, you will find one of those essay questions will be like, why are you considering doing an MBA program? And then another one might be more self-reflective to get to know you as an individual. First thing is you want to make sure you answer the question. And one of the advices I have, if you give it to somebody to proofread, actually have them proofread your answer. Don't give them the question, and then ask them, what do you think the question is? That's the best way to make sure that you've answered the question. The one thing when people say essays, you think about the essays that you did in school, right? Like an intro and a body and an ending. You have a word limit. There's not enough time to do that. And I would say my biggest advice around the written essays is you want to write it for an audience of 1. You want to keep it very, very personalized in nature. And the reason for that is, imagine I'm on the other side of your desk or your screen and you are writing it as you're talking to me. It keeps it personalized, but also as members of the admissions committee, we read them as individuals. Here's the biggest mistake people do is they try to fit everything in the limited time in the video essays or the word limit. This is a snapshot. And so, the analogy that I'll use is treat the essays like the trailer to the movie. And if you think about the trailer to a movie, you get 2 minutes, 30 seconds. That's a summary of a 2-hour movie. So think about this as your trailer, your personal trailer. The movie is actually your admissions interview. You're going to have the opportunity to talk more about your experiences. Be clear, be concise, be creative, but most importantly, be yourself. And the reason for that is when you do the interview, what they will do is they will ask questions about what you put in the essays. And they'll actually probe, well, tell me more about that. And if it's not really a true reflection of you and your essays, your story is going to collapse in the interview. So really, really important that you don't write this by saying, here's what I think the school wants to know or wants to hear. Write it that is authentically you. So I'm going to talk about the interview. Our interviews are done by members of our career management department, and they're actually the career coaches that work with you in the program. The reason they do that is we want to make sure that the program's a good fit for you and your career goals. We want to learn more about your experience, want to learn more about your career goals, because we want to feel confident if you're admitted into a program that we're going to deliver, again, back to what's important to us. We want to make sure that we're going to deliver on your goals. Big thing about interviews, it is like storytelling. You want to be prepared and not scripted. So it's okay to have bullet points. What you don't want to be doing is actually reading from a script. You want to be yourself. You want to do research. You want to practice. What you want to do is practice telling some of the stories that you have about your experiences to a friend or a family member or a colleague. And the last thing is, it's a great opportunity. Make sure you have some questions prepared for your interviewer. For us, a lot of people will talk about career management and how they support you in the program, maybe some industry trends, et cetera, et cetera. Some final thoughts. It is really, really important that you connect with each school before you apply. We're here to help you. And our goal is to help you put the best foot forward on your application. It's really important that you get to know the culture of each school. I really encourage you, as you think about those aspects that are what matters most to you, just like a job. You could really, really love the work you do, but if you don't like the culture, my experience is you're not going to enjoy it. So you want to make sure that you really, really think about the culture that you're joining within a program or a school. You want to make sure that you align your application submissions. One of the things that's really important to us here at Ivey, and we will actually, expedite getting a decision to you or extending your offer deadline, is that you have all your options available on what's there before you have to make a decision. And the best way to do that is make sure that if you're applying 5 or 6 schools or how many you're applying, is you align your submission deadline so you can hear back from the schools around the same time. And the last thing is be thoughtful about this decision. It is a lifelong decision. And so it's really, really important that you are very thoughtful about it. And again, goes back to that first point that I mentioned, that you really think about what matters most to you in this experience. I'm going to leave you with this quote. One of the things I love about my job and my job, it never feels like work for me. And that's where you know that you not only like your job, but you really, really love it. And what I love about it is, I describe it in this way, that I'm in the dream business. And what's fantastic is you're always only one decision away from a totally different life. And I think this really fits what an MBA program can do for you. It is very much a transformational experience, both professionally and personally. And, I think about international students, particularly, that come to Canada, move here, do a leap of faith, and you see them buying their first house here. Over the last, we had Canada Day back in July, and seeing all the international students that I've worked with on some of their social media that were getting admitted to Canadian citizenship. And it truly, truly is. But I'd really encourage you, as you think about this, it's an investment in yourself. It's an investment in your career, but it really is. You're only one decision away from a totally different life. Here are some next steps. I won't go into them, but one of the things we talk about is if you're interested in our program, you're totally willing to send in a resume for preliminary assessment, where we'll let you know if you should go ahead with an application. Don't do a special resume for us. We have great webinars and podcasts that are there. We have some online experience events. We are just starting up next month in some in-person events as well, and then submitting your application. So I'll leave it on here for a little bit. And then Sergey, be happy to take any questions if anybody has any. So happy to stick around.
Thanks so much, JD. As always, thanks for joining and thanks for sharing these valuable tips. And I can absolutely echo what you were saying about the MBA being a life-changing experience. For me, it was a life-changing experience. I got a corporate job, liked it for a while, and then I realized that there's something else that I like to do. So I work 7 days a week, but it doesn't feel like work. My wife tells me that I work too much, but it's for me, it doesn't actually feel like work. So imagine what it would be like for you. And I'm talking to everybody here on this call. Imagine what it would be like to do the work that you really love to do. And the MBA really allows you to do this. I could speak from experience of people who went to school with me. Almost all of them switched their career, but not just once. As now it's been like 17 years since I've done my MBA. Almost all of them switched their career 2 or 3 times. And the MBA gives you that possibility.
I saw one question come in. Somebody asked, does Ivey consider postdoctoral work experience in academia after PhD as work experience? And we absolutely do. So we've had some cases of that in the past. So we definitely do. So.
Thank you. So if anybody has any other questions, please put them in the Q&A box or in the chat box. I have seen one more question that was, I guess, addressed to me. Do you recommend the online exam or the one in the center? It is really a personal choice. I think, JD, you accept both exams at par.
We do. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I'm not sure, I think even after COVID, they're going to continue with the online exam. We accept both of them. And so, I think, Sergey, you put it right. It comes down to a personal choice for sure. So,
okay. The exams used to be slightly different, but now they are actually exactly the same.
Yeah.
There's some pros and cons. Actually, did you know that in the online exam, you can have a glass of water on the table during the exam?
That's right.
But you cannot have that during the test
in person.
But at the same time, you can have kids and dogs barking. So, and you also need to see if you have space.
The key thing with the online exam, you need a quiet space because the technology, if they detect any movement in the camera or anything else, it will shut the exam down. So you really need to make sure you have a very quiet space for that 3.5 hours. So,
okay. I mean, the most important thing is be ready. And whichever exam you're going to do, just be ready. The whiteboard you're going to be using is going to be a little bit different. So practice with that whiteboard.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, thanks. Okay. All right. So thanks very much again, everybody, for joining. Please do connect with us. I've posted in the chat box JD's LinkedIn link and my LinkedIn link. So please do connect with us. We're here to help you make the best decision we're here, we're your resources, but we cannot make these decisions for you. So please make this decision, and happy decision making. The world needs leaders, future leaders. We have lots of problems in the world to solve. So if you feel like you have what it takes, then please step up and do the MBA if you think this is where you want to take your career. Please look for an email from us tomorrow with the links to a lot of resources. And JD, is there anything you would like to add?
That's it. I think, you know, the last thing I just do it, right? It's like that Nike commercial, just do it. So, yeah.
Exactly. There was, if you allow me, I'm just going to share one final thing that when I was at the MBA, at the GMAT conference a couple of years ago, there was a survey that was done. And I think either the GMAT or another organization went out and asked MBA alumni 3 questions. They said, was the MBA experience rewarding personally, professionally, and financially? And they've asked exactly the same question to recent graduates, and they've asked exactly the same questions to people about 10 years after graduation. And guess what? Everybody, and I think it was over 90% of people, the recent graduates said it was rewarding personally and professionally, but not so much financially, because I have a huge debt right now for some of it. But 10 years later, or it was like maybe even less, everybody said it was the best decision they've ever made. And I know, JD, sometimes you tell a story about how you moved for the career and you sold your car and you lost a few $1,000s, but it was still the best decision you've ever made.
Absolutely.
So you're going to look back on this and saying, I'm so glad that I did it. And I'm glad I did it at that time, because the small change in your career, and MBA is a huge change, but a small change in your career can accumulate and compound. And by the time you're 40, 50 years old, you just will feel like you've made such drastic changes in your career.
And that, you know, Sergey, you mentioned a good point. I'll just segue to here is that a lot of times people will look at employment reports, right? But that is only your first job after graduation. And, you know, it's an important thing to look at, right? Because you want to look at placement rates and all of that. But the reality of the payoff is a lifetime career-wise. And I think that sometimes get lost by the fact that all of us, we post, you know, employment reports, but it's really, you know, it's like 5 years down the road, you want to do something different. It's a lot easier to pivot when you have that MBA than without it. So, yeah.
A long-term investment.
Exactly. Yeah. That's
awesome.
Great. Well, thanks,
so
Sergey.
much,
Thank you, everyone.
You,
it was a pleasure to see you again. So thanks so much.
It was a pleasure to see you.
Take care. Bye-bye.